In what appears to be just another stretch of murky water in the mangrove swamps, an evolutionary anomaly unfolds. A fish hoists itself up onto land, stepping into a world that, by all common knowledge, is the one place a fish is never supposed to be: land. It's a feat that leaves even seasoned biologists confused. You might think these creatures are amphibians, like frogs or salamanders, built for both land and water. But these fish, called mudskippers, are undoubtedly real fish, complete with gills, fins, and everything that should keep them underwater. And yet, against all expectations, they refuse to stay there. I initially thought these fish had a death wish. When I think about a fish out of water, I think of one flopping onto the bank gasping for oxygen, kind of like my pet goldfish did when I was 5. But some fish, like the spirited mudskipper, turn the shoreline into an extension of their habitat. They crawl across slick mud, sunbathe, brawl over territory, and even perform these displays to attract mates. So how did a creature built for life underwater break nature's rules so blatantly? How is it possible that these fish are able to exist, let alone thrive, on land? And what do they stand to gain by trading the safety of the sea for flopping around on shore? To understand why mudskippers have become so bizarrely adapted to life on land, we first have to understand the most obvious problem they're overcoming: breathing. Fish, like all vertebrates, need oxygen. But instead of inhaling air like we do, they extract it from water using gills, delicate, feather-like structures that allow dissolved oxygen to diffuse into their blood. This system works perfectly fine in water, but it falls apart the moment a fish is removed from its environment. Without water to keep their gills moist and functional, most fish quickly suffocate. But mudskippers have a workaround, or more accurately, several workarounds. They have highly vascularized skin, meaning their skin is packed with blood vessels close to the surface, which allows them to absorb oxygen directly from the air, as long as they stay wet. Essentially, they breathe through their skin, just like some amphibians. They even have modified gill chambers that hold a small reservoir of water, preventing their gills from collapsing when they leave the ocean. By trapping water inside, they create a makeshift lung that lets them extract oxygen even while they're on land. But just because these fish can breathe on land doesn't mean they can actually survive on it. On land, most fish are completely helpless, reduced to a pathetic, flopping struggle. But mudskippers have muscular joint pectoral fins that act more like tiny arms, allowing them to crawl across the mud, like some kind of evolutionary experiment that got loose. They don't just inch forward either, they leap, flinging themselves forward in erratic bursts using their tail for propulsion. And they don't just walk on land, they thrive on it. These fish can launch themselves over 2 feet into the air and battle each other for the best real estate. Land isn't just a challenge for them, it's a battleground. These fish are smart enough to recognize rivals. Studies have shown that male mudskippers can remember past fights and adjust their behavior accordingly. If they've already lost a battle to another male, they are less likely to challenge that same rival again. That means they aren't just mindlessly fighting over and over. They learn from experience, something we don't always expect from fish. It's almost as if they are competing in ranked mudskipping. Mudskippers are also intelligent when it comes to hunting. Unlike most fish, which rely on speed and agility to catch prey in water, mudskippers need a completely different approach on land. Instead of chasing things down, they use a vacuum-like feeding mechanism to suction up insects, worms, and small crustaceans. Scientists have found that mudskippers will adjust their hunting strategy based on their environment. If the mud is soft, they lunge forward and slurp up food. But if they are on drier ground, they use a more controlled approach, sometimes even waiting for their prey to move before striking. But what could possibly be worth that much effort? It turns out, leaving the water gives mudskippers access to an untapped buffet of food. While other fish are stuck competing for resources underwater, mudskippers can wander the mudflats, picking off the tiny invertebrates that would otherwise be inaccessible. This is a huge advantage, and when competition is fierce, the winners are the ones who find a way to exploit resources that no one else can reach. But for a fish that spends so much time on land, it also needs to be able to keep its body moist. That's why mudskippers are obsessed with mud. They roll in it, burrow in it, and even build tiny tidal pools to keep themselves wet. Some species even dig elaborate burrows with little air pockets inside, which not only keep them hydrated but also double as a place to lay their eggs. Yes, these mudskippers mate and reproduce on land too. A female lays her eggs inside the burrow, but there's a problem. Underwater, there's no direct access to air, and since baby mudskippers still need oxygen, the male does something incredibly weird. He gulps air at the surface, swims down and burps it into the burrow, effectively creating an artificial oxygen supply. Surprisingly, certain mudskippers found out how to cheat the dating game. Some male mudskippers will wait on the edges of another male's territory, watching as the female enters his burrow. Then, while the dominant male is busy guarding his land, the sneaky one slips inside and mates with the female right under his rival's nose. With even their reproductive life on land, mudskippers seem to have more in common with amphibians than most fish. So why are they even classified as fish? Despite everything we've discussed, they still check all the boxes. They have gills, they have fins, scales, and even a skeletal structure that places them firmly within the fish family tree. Their closest relatives are gobies, fully aquatic fish that never leave the water. Unlike amphibians, they don't hatch as tadpoles or undergo metamorphosis. They are not halfway through some grand evolutionary transformation. They're simply fish that have adapted. But if mudskippers prove anything, it's that being a fish isn't as simple as staying in the water. Evolution doesn't follow strict categories. It works with whatever is available, bending the rules whenever it gives a species an advantage. And in a world where survival is a constant battle, mudskippers have done something remarkable. They've taken the strengths of both land and water and turned them into an entirely new way of life. And they are not alone. Mudskippers may be the most extreme example, but they are part of a much larger trend. Other fish around the world have also pushed the limits of what it means to be a fish. Walking catfish in Southeast Asia slither across wet roads and ditches to find new ponds. Climbing perch can survive for days out of water, even using their gill plates to drag themselves across dry land. And there's lungfish, an ancient survivor that can entomb itself in dried mud and wait for rain, even if it takes years. These creatures are proof that the boundary between land and water is more flexible than we think, and that brings up a much bigger question. Are we watching evolution in action? Could fish like mudskippers, if given enough time, take things even further? Is it possible that mudskippers could become fully terrestrial, ditching water entirely? Right now, we don't know. But what we do know is that evolution never really stops. It doesn't care about categories, and it doesn't follow rules. If life finds an advantage, it will take it. But for now, mudskippers will remain one of the most bizarre, rule-breaking, and feisty creatures on the planet. A fish that walks, breathes air, and thrives where no fish should ever be. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. I promise I read all of your feedback. I'm posting a new video every week, so let me know what you want to see next. Mudskippers got their video, so now it's your turn.